Hi, everyone. Welcome to the adult meeting. By God's grace, we'll continue where we left off before in the liturgy series. Let me bring up my screen and we can share it. The place we left off before is today we're going to talk about the liturgy and spirituality. Last time we talked about liturgy and theology, and this time we're going to talk about liturgy and the spiritual life. Probably one of the more important talks. I'll start with this quote from St. John Chrysostom: "It is needful to understand the miracle of the mysteries, what it is, why it was given, and what is its profit. So again, always this is so important that we encompass both mind and body when we study. Why do we study anything? Once again, it allows me to fully participate with my whole being in the Eucharist. And as the Eucharist is the central part of the Orthodox worship, it's so important that this is something we really understand so that we can delve into just to penetrate what it is and what it does for us. And this particular talk, the talk on spiritual life, is actually the focus of all the other lessons, if you will, and it's supported by all of them. It's kind of the pinnacle of the whole thing, right? They derive their importance from this subject. So when we study about iconography or theology or history or any of those things, we're really talking about spiritual life and participating in our own. So this is probably one of the most important talks on the spiritual life. Quickly reviewing from last time, the liturgy is the work of the people. Lit means people, erg means work. So it's something we all do together as a group. And this is very important for this particular talk, but going back to the Middle Ages talk, those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. And so we want to learn from what happened in the Western Church, not because we want to prove we're right and they're wrong and we're better and they're bad, but rather that we just want to make sure we don't make our own mistakes. We see that in the church. We studied this a few weeks ago. Western Church made two mistakes. First, they allowed politics to enter into the church, which we've always talked about as being a very dangerous thing, since politics is all about power. And in Christianity, there is no power. The power is Christ bends down and serves. So there's no power structure in the church the way it is in the world. And then the use of Latin, when they insisted on using a language that people didn't understand, and how this devastated the spiritual life of the liturgy and the Eucharist. And the combination of these two factors really destroyed the spiritual life. There's a split between spiritual life and liturgical life, right? Where, I kind of have my own spiritual life on one side, but the liturgy is something else. I just kind of attend the liturgy, but I have my own, I have my own Bible study and my own singing group and my own hymns, and I do my own thing, and then I go to liturgy, right? And it splits the spiritual life and the liturgical life, and that's a very dangerous thing. And then, even not even understanding the liturgy was okay. You just perform the liturgy, you do the things, you say the words, and everyone's happy. And this created a gulf between the laity and the clergy. The clergy were these guys who just did the things, and the laity were the rest of us. And we all just kind of sat around and watched them do their thing, not really understanding what they're doing or why they're doing it, and ended up, this giving birth to the Protestant movements, right? Where the Protestant movement came in as kind of the people move of the masses, where they said, look, forget this clergy, forget this liturgy, forget all this stuff. And it created this very widening gulf between the ritualistic Catholicism that had occurred in the Middle Ages, where all we focused on was the body and rituals, and there was no meaning and no spiritual life, to Protestantism, which reacted and said, no, we're all going to be about the people, we're all going to be about spirituality, we're going to get rid of the clergy, we're going to get rid of the sacraments, we're going to get rid of the rituals, and we're just going to have spirituality. And Orthodoxy has always kind of been in the middle between these two extremes. And we let many historians see the Protestant Reformation revolution as a reaction, if you will, to Catholicism that had gone a little bit awry with its focus on ritualistic intentions. Really important, again, the liturgy can't be studied as a subject for knowledge and practical implications, right? I'm not just out here to study and learn a bunch of things so I can recite them to you and say, oh, well, this means this in the liturgy and this means that, and this part was instituted by, such and such patriarch, and this part, that's not really important, right? We can't allow the liturgy to be reduced to some secular just study of stuff, right? Dates, names, facts, events. That's not the liturgy. It's the liturgy studied for the sole purpose of the enhancement of your spiritual life and daily participation in the life, the feasts, the cycles, the events of the church. When we live in these cycles of the church, these feasts of the church, then we really participate in the whole being of the church much more than if we don't understand them. And so, we don't study, for example, the church building, so I can learn the different names and rules regulating its structure. Rather, I want to elevate my mind to the heavenly life. I want to see what the church is trying to teach me with the church structure, right? And have how that enhances my spiritual life when I'm in the building. The church was designed in a certain way to guide the mind of the faithful, right? But this design is worthless if you don't understand the symbols, right? So some people really sat down and thought about these symbols and said, let's guide people to think about heavenly things. And then we'll do this, and this will mean this, and people will think about this. But if the people don't know that that's what that means, they just see a circle and they go, oh, circle, not a dome that represents infinity, and there's an alpha and omega, and there's no beginning and no end, and that's heaven, and heaven connects to earth. If I don't think all those things and I think, oh, circle, then it kind of loses its purpose, right? There's no point in having designed a dome on a church in the first place. So we have to learn these things almost in an academic setting, but never let that be the goal and the end goal of why we learn these things. And it's a temptation that Satan uses on us sometimes. So the question is, what does an orange taste like? This is a very beautiful picture of an orange. It's actually making my mouth water. So imagine for a moment someone who has never tasted an orange, or any citrus for that matter, okay? And they ask you to write down the taste of an orange in a page. They said, I've never had an orange. Could you describe to me what an orange tastes like? And so you look at them, you go, well, I can't. In a page, I can't describe what an orange tastes like, right? And certainly, if you did write something down, it wouldn't encompass all the taste, consistency, general feeling of eating an orange, right? So when you write down your page of having eaten an orange, whatever you write is woefully inadequate, right? It's lacking in describing fully what an orange tastes like, right? Now imagine, let's take it another step further. Now, someone else who's never tasted an orange reads your one-page description, okay, and then decides to give a lecture to other people about what oranges taste like, okay? So first of all, my one page on the orange is terrible, right? There's no way it describes an orange. And you've never had an orange, you go read my one pager, and then you say, no, I'm an expert on this stuff. Let me tell a whole group of people about what oranges taste like, right? You can very safely assume that lecture is very far off from the taste of an orange. Why? Because there's no experience, right? Because that person doesn't have any personal experience with the orange. And so he can't explain just by reading someone else's account, right, about to someone else what an orange tastes like, right? If you want to give a lecture on an orange, you have to buy an orange and you have to eat it, right? And that's the best way to talk about oranges, okay? I know what you're all thinking. What's he talking about, right? And it reminds me of this psalm, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good, right? David doesn't tell us, let me tell you, I've tasted God and he is good. He doesn't say that. He says, taste and see that the Lord is good. He wants you to taste what he's tasted, right? And in fact, I can easily argue that what you will taste isn't what he tasted. It's not exactly the same, because your interaction with God is different than my interaction with God, right? In fact, my interaction with this person, you can say, oh, you should meet this guy, he's really great, right? And your relationship with that person is not going to be like my relationship with that person, right? And he's just a person. So imagine our relationships with God, right? So in order to fully relay to others what the life with God is and what the Eucharist is, we have to have tasted it ourselves, right? As servants, as parents, as just general Christians who want to talk to people outside the faith, right? If we haven't experienced, then we can't describe, right? So knowledge should never allowed to be an end in of itself, right? We must have lived the liturgy ourselves, right? As parishioners, and have it had an effect on us, right? Be a part of our lives. So the Eucharistic life of Orthodoxy, and this is Abuna Tedros Melty when he writes his books. He always talks about the Eucharistic life. He doesn't say spiritual life. He doesn't say churchy life. He says the Eucharistic life. It's like everything revolves around the Eucharist in our church, right? So the Orthodox Church differs from other, Christian sects, right? The center of our religion and our entire Christian worship is the Eucharist, right? We've learned this historically, we've learned it theologically, and now we're going to see how this is true spiritually, right? And like I've said, on other occasions, we don't tell the children that the Eucharist is important. We tell them it's everything, right? It's not just important, it's everything. It's our life, it's the center, right? And in fact, everything you notice when we do things, we always do them with the Eucharist, right? So if it's the feast of Saint Abram, the Bishop of Fayum, for example, and I want to celebrate his feast, what am I going to do? I can have a party, I can have a banquet, I can go and I can sing some songs, but what am I going to do? I'm going to have a liturgy, right? And this is how we commemorate any feast. It's the feast of the circumcision. What am I going to do? I'm going to have a liturgy. The feast of resurrection, I'm going to have a liturgy, right? How do we start a meeting, for example, when I want to have a spiritual day with the servants? What do? We start with the liturgy, right? And how do I commemorate, for example, the repose of someone in our life? My grandmother's passed away, and this is the anniversary of her passing, and I want to celebrate it. How do I celebrate it? I have a Eucharist, I have a liturgy, right? And we do this on the 1-year anniversaries often of people's reposals. Right? This is what the church does, right? When Abuna has to go to a really far away place and doesn't have a church and he can only get there, once every month or once every 2 months, he doesn't go there and have a basketball league and a Bible study and even feeding the poor. He goes there and if he only has 3 hours a month, right, he's going to do one thing. He's going to do the Eucharist, right? And that's the one thing that's going to bring us all together, right? That's why even during the pandemic period, right, when all the church services were shut down, the only thing that the church tried to keep going was the Eucharist, right? So we're the body of Christ, right? And we become a body through the Eucharist. This is how we become united in Christ and in each other, as we learned last time, right? So therefore, everything we do revolves around the liturgy. It's the mystery of mysteries, and it's the source of grace in the church, right? And all of the cycles of the liturgy, that we have cycles in the church, right? We have daily cycles, we have a weekly cycle, we have a monthly cycle, we have an annual cycle. There's these cycles that run in the church. All of them revolve around the liturgy, right? The daily cycle of Vespers and Matins and Tezbeha, all of these are in around the liturgy, right? So these services were not put in place in and of themselves. We didn't just say, let's just have Ashaya, or Vespers, let's just have a Tezbeha, rather, but they're put in place to prepare everyone for communion, right? So if I'm going to stay up all night and praise, I'm not going to do it just because it's fun or I like the hymns or they sound really cool. It's going to put me in the place for communion the next day, right? And they're not there so that Abuna and a handful of people can get them out of the way, right? Someone's got to do Vespers. Someone's got to do the Matins. Abuna, take a deacon and just get it out of the way. No, it's not there. It's not like something we have to get done, right? One time I heard a deacon say, oh, well, what we do is during Vespers, we say Tezbeha silently while Vespers is going so we can get it out of the way so we can go out to eat. And you're like, wow, you've really kind of lost the meaning of the whole thing. At that point, you just think God's like going to check. Don't say it. God's just going to check a box and say, oh, good, you said it silently. You weren't really paying attention, but at least you said the words. What kind of spiritual life is that? Is that what Christ would have asked for? Right? So we have to think about what these things are and how they relate to the Eucharist. All these things are there to prepare us for the Eucharist. So before I get into the spiritual life, I want to talk about the doctrine of grace and free will. And this is a big kind of debate in the church that's been going on. What does it mean? Simply, the question is, if I see someone living a good life and they're free from sin, or not free from sin, but they're good people, right? Is this person good because of God's grace? So God is helping them become good? Or is this person good because of their struggle against sin, right? And they've been working hard and they have this personal struggle. Which is it? Are they good because God made them good? Or are they good because they struggle against sin? Well, as you can guess, the answer is both, right? Both working together, right? So certainly one cannot dare assume that we can live a holy life without God's grace and God's guidance. You know, that's crazy, right? And then, you know, even in the Igbeya, we say, you know, our prayers are all geared toward that way. Sanctify our souls, make chaste our bodies, correct our thoughts, purify our intentions, heal our sickness, right? We ask God to do to us, right? Do these things to me, purify my intentions. I can't purify my own intentions. You purify them for me. I'm going to put them in your hand, right? But likewise, it would also be foolish to think God's grace without my own effort and my own struggle will accomplish anything, right? If I don't want to live a pure life and I choose not to, then God can't force me, right? He's not going to impose himself on me. And there is struggle. In fact, the only thing we offer to God is struggle. That's all we have to offer. We can't offer good deeds because we don't have very many of those. We can't offer success and say, look, you know, we beat the sin, or we did these really good things, we're great. All I can offer is a struggle, right? And I can put my struggle in God's hands and say, now you do the rest, right? And just like we talked about the 5 loaves and the 2 fish over and over, our struggle are the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And the success that God gives is just a bounty, right? But I have to put in the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. I have to put in that struggle, as weak and as pathetic as it is. And sometimes I don't want to struggle. So sometimes all I can do is, God, give me the strength to struggle, right? Abuna Metta al-Miskin says, you know, all we have to do is we have to put our hand out like a beggar and say, God, give me. And we have to just put our hand out there. And sometimes we're so weak, we can't put our hands out there. So we say, God, can you please hold my hand out so that you can put food in it, right? Imagine the beggar who says, I can't put my hand out. Could you just grab my hand, hold it so that you can put food in it, right? So that's okay too, right? And God accepts that, you know, completely. So this is the idea of grace and free will, right? This idea that the both have to be together, that one or the other isn't enough or can't be enough. So throughout history, and I'll give you a very brief historical thing, there's been people who've taken extremes on both sides. And just like we see with other things, orthodoxy is never a religion of extremes. It's always kind of in the middle. So this heretic named Pelagius in the 5th century, he denied the need for God's grace. Right? He said basically that the Pelagian heresy was free will alone, man's works will save him. Okay? That man works for his salvation, earns his salvation, right? And by doing these things, he earns salvation, right? And there's some people in our church today who kind of, they may not say they're, you know, attribute their teaching to Pelagius, the heretic, but they'll say the same kind of thing, right? Well, you have to work for it. You know, I have to earn it. I go to Sunday. I go to church every Sunday. I do this. I fast. I do, you know, the same stuff the Pharisees said, right? And they have these thoughts, right? We think these things, you know, that I've done this. You know, I'm going to fast a whole fast, and I'm going to do this, as if that's going to earn me something, right? Or you know, I'm going to get a bunch of bonus points from God. And so he said, man's free will alone could do it. You just have to will yourself to do it, right? And then the other extreme is obviously just grace alone does it, right? And I really don't have to do anything. I don't have to struggle. And you know, a bit of that Protestantism has a bit of that, right? Where, you know, there's all about God's grace, and it's all about how, you know, bad man is, and man really has nothing good that comes out of them. You're just horrible, and of course you're horrible, and of course you're going to be terrible, but God's going to just cover everything, right? And interestingly, Blessed Augustine, and in the Eastern Orthodox Church, they call him Blessed Augustine. They don't call him a saint. He kind of leaned on this side a little bit, right? And if you take that leaning just a little bit too far, right, you could kind of go down this path of predestination, right? Because if God's grace does everything, and my will has nothing to do with it, right? This is just God's grace blesses you, right? Well, then the question is, who gets blessed and who doesn't get blessed, right? If it's all coming from God, well, then how does God pick him? And this guy's good because God made him good, and this guy's bad because God didn't make him good. So why did God make him good and God not make him good, right? And there's a bit of this predestination that comes out of it, right? In fact, Calvin, who really adopted this concept of predestination, got most of his fodder, his feed from Augustine's writings, right? You know, in the 5th century. So Augustine had a little bit of this leaning where he's like, because Augustine's background, as you may know, is a really bad guy, right? He was just a really bad person until he converted. And so his view of people is like, people are really bad, right? And everything good in my life came from God's grace. Nothing good came from me, which is a great attitude to have. But his writings leaned a little bit too much away from personal struggle and into just put it, it's all God's grace, and there's nothing you can do, and you're just a bad person. Of course, you're going to keep sinning, and we have to offer this struggle. Pope Shenouda, used to say this, kind of tongue in cheek. Sometimes we look at God and say, "Look, you want me to be good? Fine, I'll be good. You just sit back there and relax, God, and I will work and I will become good." Right? And this is not what God wants from us, right? He wants to work with us to accomplish His will, right? So we need God's grace in this daily struggle. Okay, we have a struggle. We have to have a struggle, but the fuel for this struggle and God's grace to overcome anything it all comes from the Lord, right? So it's just like the body needs nourishment to keep it strong, to resist disease and sickness, to get stronger and better. The soul needs this daily nourishment, right, to aid it with its spiritual struggles against the disease of sin. Right, and those of you who've tried to fight any sin, that Satan just has to scratch at us just a little bit, and then we just fall right apart. Right, so that grace is very important. Right, so the question is, where does this grace come from that we need so badly? Right, where does this happen? Right, and the church says that the fountain of grace and blessing in Orthodoxy is the Eucharist. That's the fountain, right? And you think of a fountain, the water just keeps coming up, right? You don't know where it's coming from, okay? But it just keeps coming. Whenever if you ever come across like a natural fountain or a natural spring in the earth, it's just an amazing sight, right? You look at it and water bubbles up from the earth, and it doesn't stop bubbling up. It just keeps coming. Right, so the Eucharist for us becomes this strength that we need in our daily fight against Satan. It's the spiritual food, right? And just like the body becomes very weak if it doesn't eat, the soul becomes very weak if it's not spiritually nourished, right? And this is the nourishment. And this is why I love this icon. This icon talks about Christ as the fountain of grace, right? And so here, let's go back to this idea of synergy, right? Man who's very limited, who's very weak, who's very fallen, he unites himself with the unlimited, right? And that's the only way to overcome the temptations of Satan, right? The limited unites with the unlimited, right? He said, "He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me and I in him." Right? And we see this even in the Great Lent, right? We see that Christ fasted 40 days and 40 nights. So when I fast 40 days and 40 nights, I'm not just imitating Jesus. I'm not saying he fasted, I might as well fast. It's not that simple. I take my fast and I unite it to his fast, right? In fact, even in the refrain on Psalm 150, right, during the Lent, when we're giving communion and the deacons are reciting the Psalm 150, in between the Psalms, right, we say, Jesus Christ fasted for us or on our behalf, right? On our behalf. And in Arabic, it's more perfect, anna, right? Yeshua al-Masih sam anna 40 days and 40 nights, right? He fasted on our behalf for us. So all I have to do is I have to take my week fast, my 5 loaves and 2 fish fast, and I united with his fast. Right? So I'm not just fasting because he fasted. I'm fasting with him. I'm fasting in him. Right? My fast becomes a part of his fast. His fast is unlimited. My fast is very weak. And all I can offer is a struggle. And it's not a very good struggle. And then I have to ask God to help me with the struggle. Right? And this is what the Eucharist is for us. Right? And if you remember from last time, this beautiful verse in the Gospel of John, "I am the true vine. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself." Now we're starting to see what the meaning is. I can't bear fruit without Christ. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the true vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Right? So the fruit that comes out of us, and this is what keeps us humble as people, the fruit that comes out of us eventually, we know is Christ. It isn't even my fruit, right? And he says, "You will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." And that's very true for those of us who have tried to live a spiritual life apart from God. We know we can do nothing. right? If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. Right? So if you take a branch and you cut it off from the tree and you leave it on the ground, we all know what happens, right? The branch just dies. Okay? And this is what happens to us when we don't partake of the tree of life, right? In the story of Adam, we know there's two trees, the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Christ is the tree of life. The Eucharist is the tree of life, right? And we become a branch in that tree of life, and he's the one who sustains us and gives us life that pulses through us like a fountain. This quote from last time, just as by melting two candles together, you get one piece of wax. I think one who receives the flesh and blood of Jesus is fused together with him by this communion, and the soul finds that he is in Christ and Christ is in him. So again, another image. You have the tree and the branches, the fountain that comes up, and this, he says, is take two pieces of wax and you melt them into liquid, and then you let them dry and harden and become one piece of wax, right? You can't see where one wax stops and the other one begins, right? And this is the uniting the infinity with the finite with the infinity, right? The unlimited with the limited, right? Take my weakness, unite it with strength, right? And this is the concept that we're trying to put together. This is how spiritual life has to progress, right? And we all know this story, it's famous, but Pope Kyrillos, of blessed memory, Pope Kyrillos VI, he made it a part of his patriarch, and even before he was a patriarch, that he would take communion every day. So even when he had to fly to another country on an airplane, he would land, and he was the political head of the Coptic Church. He would go to different countries and meet dignitaries, and imagine he would fly to Rome and meet the Pope or something, and he'd say, if you don't mind, I just landed. It's 8 a.m. But before we do, could I just run in and pray a liturgy very quickly, and then we can have our meetings, right? He did that with several dignitaries and kings and emperors and all kinds of people. He insisted that the Eucharist be a part of his daily bread. So one of the spiritual concepts of communion, and we're almost done here, is there's also the practice of taking communion is done in extreme ways, and neither one is really recommended by the church. One extreme is that people think communion is so holy, right, that approaching it without being worthy brings on condemnation, right? And this point is true to some degree, that taking communion unworthily, it brings that condemnation, right? But this position can take a very prevalent role in people's minds, right? Such that they don't want to take communion. And then they even wait years or longer, right? Because they're like, I'm just not worthy, I'm just not worthy, I'm just not worthy, right? And then this is where we have some problems, right? And actually we find this in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where they kind of have a tradition of not taking communion for a very long time among the people. They have this very embedded tradition, and the clergy are working very hard to stop it. They're like, no, you need to come communion more often, right? So if you think that way, the question is, well, then what's worthy, right? Is there anyone worthy of communion at any point in time, right? And then what's even worse is if you think that, and then you show up to liturgy one day and say, okay, now I'm worthy. Well, now we even have a bigger problem, right? Because anyone that thinks they're worthy of communion, no matter how long now you've fallen into some kind of hubris, right? Arrogance, right? If you think you're worthy at this point, then now we have a bigger problem, right? So you're never worthy of communion. So what does the word worthy mean? It simply means I'm living a repentant life, right? A heart, repentance over my past sins, and an earnest desire to submit my life to God and to be better and to live with him in holiness, right? And to try with his help to overcome sin. This is what worthiness is. It's not being good. It's not doing all the right things. It's like, I'm going to keep trying. My focus is to live with God. And yeah, I'm broken and I'm a person and I'm a sinner, but I'm going to try and I'm going to keep trying. And that is what worthiness is, right? That's what makes us worthy to take communion. It's not being in a sinless state, because that's not going to happen, right? And if you think it did happen and that you are in a sinless state somehow, well, now you're just delusional, because you're not, right? Archbishop Paul of Finland says, nice quote, he says, let no one, however, because of his unworthiness, fail to accept the Lord's invitation heard in the liturgy, or think that by receiving communion less often, he can prepare for it better and be more worthy. The sense of unworthiness is just the right mood. The only one which permits us to share in God's supreme gift, right? So I love that. The sense of unworthiness is the right mood. How do you know you're worthy? It's when you realize you're unworthy, right? In fact, in the liturgy, we say, one is the holy, Abuna says, holy things for the holy, right? And when he says holy things for the holy, this is near the end of the liturgy, we should all kind of just like, ugh, I wish he hadn't said that, right? Because there ain't no holiness over here. But when he says holy things for the holy, it's like my natural response is what? What is the response when Abuna says holy things for the holy? We say, one is the Holy Father, one is the Holy Son, one is the Holy Spirit. We say, the only one that's holy is you, God, not me. And in fact, every time we say the word holy, we make the sign of the cross as if to say that the only way I'm going to become holiness, his holiness is blessing me, right? That's where holiness comes from, right? So it's the feeling of being unworthy that makes us worthy, right, to take communion. And don't ever think that, oh, I'm going to abstain from this sin, or I'm going to try to be good. And that's, sin, as we all do, right? And when we do come to communion unworthily, right? And that feeling is what drives us. Oh, okay. All right. So fasting before communion is another important point. St. John Chrysostom says, but will you fast before you partake so that you may somehow appear worthy of communion, right? And so there is a long tradition of fasting before communion. And I'll read to you this quote from Isidore. He says, the apostles did not communicate fasting because it was necessary that the figurative Pascha must first be fulfilled. So what he's trying to point out here is, we often say this as well, the disciples ate right before they took communion, right? We had the Passover meal, and then they took communion together. So why do we have to fast when the initial apostles didn't fast? Christ didn't institute it that way. But what these quotes are showing is that from the earliest years, people were fasting before communion. The question is why? So he addresses it. He says the apostles didn't communicate fasting because it was necessary that the figurative Pascha might be fulfilled. And we'll talk about this next time. But the Eucharist was prefigured in the Old Testament with the Pascha. Okay? And so what Christ wanted to do is he took the Pascha, the Passover, and he said, okay, that's the Passover. We're going to eat that first. And then right after it, I'm going to give you the new Passover, right? The real sacrifice, right? Where, the Passover was a lamb that died so that the people of Israel could live. Well, let me show you the real lamb that dies so that people can live, right? So he put the two together to connect them in our minds. I'm going to have the Passover, and then I'm going to have communion, and I'm going to show you what the new Passover looks like. And this is why, as Christians, we don't have the Passover meal anymore, right? We don't do that. Although Moses commanded that every generation do the Passover to commemorate this event of being saved from the people of Israel. Now we don't do that as Christians. We stopped, right? And the reason we stopped is that Passover was just symbolic, was a type of the real Passover. It was a part of the mystery that the disciples first did not receive the body and blood of the Lord, fasting. But now it is received through the entire church by those who are fasting. So this is back in 560 AD. John Chrysostom was before that, a century before that. So you can see that fasting before communion is a very, very old tradition. For thus was it pleasing to the Holy Spirit through the apostles that in honor of so great a sacrament, that the Lord's body should enter into the mouth of a Christian before any other food. And this is what we say to this day, right? Before you put any other food in your mouth, let the body of the Lord be the first thing you put in your mouth, right? Let it take the honorary role, right? Let it break the fast of sleeping. Let that be, as opposed to having like, I'm gonna have a cheeseburger and then I'm gonna have communion and then I'm gonna have fries, right? Let the communion have a better place than that, right? Then, after a breakfast burrito, then I'll take communion and then I'll, have some salsa, right? Right. And on that account, this practice is observed throughout the whole world, for the bread which we break is the body of Christ. So this is why we do fasting before communion. And sometimes we get a little carried away with the 9 hours. So 9 hours is a general guideline. It's not a hard and fast rule. And sometimes, we'll say, oh, it has to be the midnight, the night before. This isn't the primary purpose of fasting. It's not like, oh shoot, it's 12:03 p.m. a.m. or 12:03 a.m. and I can't fast any, I can't take communion tomorrow because it's 3 minutes over. This is not the way Christians operate, right? This is something very pharisaical. Right? We have to think about fasting as imposing on myself a restriction. If something comes up, whether it be medicine or an accident or I need water or something, obviously the church is going to give us an absolution to do that. Now I want to talk very briefly about confession and communion. There's another notion that confession, the act of confession to the priest, is the sole key of worthiness to communion. And this is also not very accurate, right? Having confession once every 1 or 2 months, 3 or 4 months sometimes is fine, right? It's not like I have to have confession before communion every single time, or I want to take communion but I didn't confess this week. Right? No, confession isn't that. Right? Confession is not like, well, I gotta get every single sin so that I'm worthy somehow of communion because now I'm pure. No, we always take communion unworthily. We always take communion impurely, right? I mean, even if you had confession the day before, most likely during the liturgy at some point you're going to look at someone or you're going to think something and you'll sin during the liturgy at some point. I know I have. So this ideal that if I can confess the night before, then I take it pure. You're not going to be pure, right? So the church doesn't expect you to go confession every single time, right? So it's not so much the confession, the absolution in the confession that makes us worthy, right? But it's the feeling of being unworthy that makes you worthy, right? And if you wait until all this happens, right, and you say, well, I want to be this pure person when I take communion, you need communion to be a pure person, right? And so there's this kind of catch-22. To say I'm going to wait till I become pure, and then take communion. Well, how can you take communion? How can you become pure without the grace of God? In fact, what's happened is you've fallen into Pelagius's heresy at this point, right? If you say, I'm going to be good on my own, and then I'll take the grace of God, well, then now that's what Pelagius believed, right? That the heretic that we talked about, right? So, a sick person doesn't say, I don't want to go to the doctor right now because I'm feeling sick. I'll wait till I'm feeling better, right? And then I'll go to the doctor. Right? It's obviously, when you say it like that, you realize it's stupid, right? It's not very, and so the sick feeling, or the feeling of being unworthy, or the problem, is just the right time to go to the doctor, right? In fact, it's the best time to go to the doctor, right? You don't say, I'm going to wait till I beat this cancer and then I'm going to go to the hospital, right? You go to the hospital so you can beat the cancer, okay? And so communion is that. It's that grace, and that's how we move forward. And then the second kind of extreme, I think my slides are out of order. That's what confused me. So the first extreme is I'm going to wait till I'm completely ready and I'm good and I'm holy before I take communion. And then the second extreme is another very common one, which is more common, I think, is taking communion for people who are absolutely no regard for what they're doing, right? Or they take communion out of some weekly routine, or even more. I go Wednesday and I go Friday and I go Saturday and I go Sunday. Okay, that's wonderful, right? But do you have any regard for what you're taking? Right? Or are you just going as a habit, right? As a ritual, as a way to feel good about yourself and just kind of get it out of the way, right? So here we have to heed the warning of St. Paul. St. Paul says in the Epistle to the Corinthians, so then whoever eats the bread and drinks of the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. Right? So there's some very strong admonitions in the Bible about taking communion unworthily, right? And again, this is the part I said before, the priest says holy things are for the holy. So we must be holy and pure to partake of communion, and should never allow it to be a routine thing. Right? Those who allow themselves to fall into this weekly routine take a dangerous path, and they have to talk to their father in confession about this, right? Where he's like, I just kind of show up and I just stand there for a while, and I take communion, I leave, and nothing changes, right? And if we don't see change in the life of a Christian, if there isn't a struggle, if there isn't growth in the life of the Christian, something's wrong. Something's wrong, and we have to fix it. If I go every week and I just kind of take communion and I leave, when I look at the story of the Samaritan woman, right? Christ was with her for half an hour, and he changed her life. And I have to believe that whenever light meets darkness, light has to win, and that goodness has to overcome evil. So when I meet Christ, if I really meet Christ, I can't come away from the experience the same. Right? I mean, people say, I met the the Dalai Lama and it changed my life. Well, the Dalai Lama is a guy, right? And so it can never be the case that I can meet Christ, really meet Christ, and just come away, yeah, just like I was, right? Then I didn't really meet Christ. And if I'm not really meeting Christ, then something's wrong. Maybe I'm taking communion unworthily. Or I'm, when I say worthy, not because good or bad, unworthy, like I don't really feel unworthy. I don't really have any regard for what I'm doing. I just kind of show up. You know, I think of Simon the Pharisee when he invited Jesus into his home, and he had no idea who he invited into his home, right? I mean, other people would be like, this is the couch that Jesus sat on. This is the couch that Jesus sat on. Simon looks him up and down and goes, who is this guy? This guy even for real? Right? It's a totally different, and that's why Simon got nothing out of it, right? Whereas the woman that then came, the sinful woman that cried on his feet and washed them with the hair of her head, she got everything, right? So you have two people that showed up to communion. One got everything and one got nothing. In fact, one got, as St. Paul says here, one got condemnation. Simon was condemned. He says, you never even washed my feet with water, and she washed them with her tears. You never dried them. She dried them with her hair. Right? And the fathers are completely against this notion of refraining from communion until they're worthy. Right? So nobody wants you to wait till you're worthy, right? But encourages everyone to continue taking communion. Communion is an invitation. Christ said, do this in remembrance of me, and he wants us to continue doing it, and that's what the apostles did. St. John Cassian, I'll give you a few more quotes, and then I think that's it. We should not, however, suspend ourselves from the Lord's communion because we realize that we are sinners. Rather, more and more, we should hasten to it with eagerness for healing of soul and purification of spirit, but with such humility and faith that we judge ourselves unworthy to receive so great a favor. So you see the balance here. We should rather more and more hasten to it as healing of soul and purification of spirit, but with faith and humility enough to know and judge ourselves unworthy of it. So I want it and I hasten towards it, but I know I'm not worthy of it. But yet I keep going towards it. I don't let the unworthiness stop me, and I don't let the hastening towards it just be hastening without humility and feeling unworthy. Otherwise, we must not presume to receive communion worthily even once a year, as some do who live in monasteries. They esteem the dignity and sanctity and value of the heavenly sacrament so highly that they consider that only the holy and pure should receive it, rather than that it makes us holy and pure by partaking of it. Right? So he kind of says the same thing in this quote. He says, these people esteem it so highly that they think only the holy and pure should receive it, rather than thinking receiving it will make me holy and pure. Surely they fall into a greater arrogance of presumption than they think that they're avoiding. Because at least when they do receive it, they think they are worthy to receive it, right? So he's saying this is so arrogant, right? If you say, I'm only going to take it when I'm holy and pure, wow, look, God help you when you take it, right? I'd love to, watch you take it and go, really? So today's your day? Today's the day you're holy and pure. But it is far better to receive the sacrament as a remedy for our ills on every Lord's day with that humility of heart, whereby we believe and confess that we can never worthily come to those sacred mysteries, right? So keep taking it and always believe you can never worthily come to it, than to be carried away by a vain belief that we are worthy to partake, right? So this is kind of I have a lot of quotes here by different fathers. I'm not sure I will read them all to you. I'll put them up slowly so that you can read them and by pausing the YouTube at some point or the video. So just to end, how do we benefit from the liturgy? You get out of it what you put into it. The benefit depends on the preparation of the heart. And this is true of anything, right? It could be from school to physical exercise, right? The benefit received equals the effort exerted. And the Eucharist is no different, right? If we come to the liturgy with the attitude of, okay, I'm here, I made it, impress me, do something, do your thing, right? This person gets nothing out of it. This is the Simon of the world, right? Who invites Christ in and has no idea who he just invited into his house, right? Because we're not putting anything into it, right? And this goes back to the first talk, right? And what we said in the beginning of this talk, work of the people. There is a work that has to happen here, right? It's not just abunas and the deacons, right? Active participation means active, physically active, singing, performing the rituals, using your mind to focus on the words and the prayers and putting yourself in that place. That's not easy to do, right? Especially for 2 hours. It takes concentration, especially in today's day and age where concentration is out the window, right? You know, you have 10-second TikTok videos, if TikTok sticks around. But you know, ultimately, it takes effort, right? It takes a mind, it takes, you know, brain power to sit there and focus for that long. But that's where the benefit is. It's like saying, well, you know, if I, you know, to learn all those things, I'd really have to study, you know, and I'd have to sit there and really learn, you know. Well, yeah, that's true. That's the only way you're going to learn. Or if I really want to get in shape, I really got to work out really hard, and I got to like sweat and stuff, and my heart rate's got to go up, you know, before I get in shape. I don't want to do that. Okay, then don't. But then don't complain when we're not in shape, or don't complain when I don't have any knowledge and I don't get A's. Right? So understanding the prostrations, understanding prostration, sign of the cross, mentally flowing, it takes a lot out of us, right? And we see that even the disciples didn't have a great track record, right? So, you know, in the Last Supper, all 12 of them took communion. One then goes, betrays him, Judas. One denies him, Peter. 9 of them fled, okay? And only one of them, St. John, made it, the beloved, made it to the cross. Okay, so all 12 take communion, and then after that, their track record's pretty lousy, right? They all just take off. One denies, one, you know, Peter swears and curses that he doesn't know the guy. Judas goes and betrays him. So it's not a great track record, right? So there's no guarantees, you know, of the situation, right? And only one followed him to the cross, but that's okay, right? We'll try to keep hoping to be that one every single Sunday. Anyway, thank you very much, and God bless you guys. One of these days, I'll get to see you all in person. And thanks for tuning in. I know it's very difficult in Zoom, and hoping that all of you stay healthy, and don't lose your minds in your houses. Try to get out every once in a while and see the sights. Okay, God bless, and I'll talk to you later.